In the year 2015, much to the dismay of fans and players all over the world, Games Workshop announced that our beloved square-based game Warhammer Fantasy Battles was being discontinued. And while the game was officially dead from the perspective of Games Workshop, it still had an active community. People continued to play the old editions, 6th and 8th editions probably being the most popular, and also fan-made versions of the game such as Warhammer Armies Project was created and played by many. And I guess Games Workshop saw the tenacity of the community and the love that people still had for the game and realized that there still is a market for Warhammer Fantasy Battles after all. And on the 15th of November 2019, an announcement was made. The return of square bases in Warhammer, the old world. The community celebrated and everyone got super excited for things to come. And it's now been 3.5 years since then. And as of late, the rate of which we have been receiving updates and news about the old world has increased. And also the actual content of the news we've been receiving has been way better than ever before. So what I'm going to do here today is I'm going to summarize everything we know about the old world so far, from factions, settings, models and much more. And I'm going to start with the setting. And this is one of the controversial topics regarding the old world. Many were not happy with how the story of Warhammer Fantasy ended. The story concluded in an event or a time period called the End Times, which saw many beloved characters killed or even changed, meaning that they acted in uncharacteristic ways just to get closure and fit the narrative of the End Times. And the End Times was a way for Games Workshop to get closure on the story of Warhammer Fantasy as the game was discontinued. And as many of you know, it ended with the destruction of the world of fantasy as we knew it. And because of this, when the old world was announced, the setting was a hot topic. Some wanted a completely new world. Some wanted the same world but with a different timeline without end times. And some wanted the same timeline which ended in the end times but exploring new and interesting parts of it. And Games Workshop has announced that it is in fact the same timeline as before. The one that will eventually end in the end times and the destruction of the world. There are some pros and cons to this. One of the pros is that all the old lore is still relevant. One of the cons is that we know the ending, and it is an ending that many found less than satisfactory. And the part of the old world that we're going to be exploring takes place a couple of 100 years before the end times. It's gonna be set in the decades before the Siege of Prague, which happened in the year 2302 of the imperial calendar. We also know that King Loren of Bretonnia declared an errantry war against the orcs in the year 2201. And during the old world he is known as the Orc Slayer. And I find it hard to believe he would be called the Orc Slayer before killing orcs. And that would put us in the years between 2201 and 2302. And for reference, the end times began in the year 2519, so that would put us roughly 220 to 300 years before the end times began. The game will take place in the lands between the Bretonnian coast in the west and the World Edge Mountains in the east. And there has been loads of maps released detailing the area. Games Workshop has also stated that a large part of the story, at least initially, will take place around the border princes, which is kind of a barrier between the orc territories and the territories of the Empire. And initially they're gonna focus on the factions of Bretonnia and Tomb Kings. And I think this is a really smart move on Games Workshop's part. These are armies that are really sought after and they have exploded in price on the second-hand market recently. And since they have not been in print for a very long time, if Games Workshop start releasing new or old models for them, they're still gonna be able to sell a ton of models. So I think it's super smart on their part, starting with the factions that have maybe been out of print for one of the longest times. And to touch back on that a little bit, Games Workshop have said that they will be releasing old sculpts again, as well as new sculpts for both these factions. They have also said that they will not be releasing a starter box for the game that contains everything you need to play. For example, like they did with Horus Heresy. But it is very likely that they will release some kind of start collecting box. And the models they've shown so far look amazing. Here you have a new Tomb King sculpt and a Paladin sculpt. Other than these two factions, the core factions of the game will be the Empire, or the Empire of Man as they call it for some reason, Orc and Goblin tribes, Dwarven Mountain Holds, Warriors of Chaos, Beastmen Brayherds, Wood Elf realms, and the High Elf realms. All of these factions will be featured in the narrative of the old world and will have rules published for them at launch. These armies will also receive new models, and all sculpts will be returning as well. Other factions such as the Dark Elves and the Ogre Kingdoms, as well as the Skaven, Vampire Counts, Demons of Chaos, Lizardmen and Chaos Dwarves will not be part of the narrative of the old world. However, they will be receiving rules at the launch of the game, and you will be able to play these armies in the old world at least to some extent. We also have sketches and drawings of Kislev, but they are not announced as a playable faction. They might be part of the Empire of Man, but we'll have to see. That means that most armies from the older editions of Warhammer Fantasy will be playable in the old world. And since the game will be played in the same scale as the previous versions of Warhammer Fantasy Battles, that means that all your old armies are usable. However, there is one thing that will affect your ability to use your older armies in this new game system, and that is that Games Workshop have changed the base size of many, if not most, of the models. All the 20mm bases, for example, have been replaced with 25mm bases. Most 25x50mm bases have been replaced with larger bases, and so on. And I for one think that this is a great change. Some armies are absolutely horrible to rank up, and they have very stiff poses. And this gives Games Workshop the ability to create models with new dynamic poses without making them horrible to rank up. I almost avoid playing my Orcs and Goblins army in 8th edition because I think they're so horrible to rank up. So bigger bases is a big win for me. And you might be thinking, well, does that not mean that everyone will need to rebase their entire armies? And I would say no. There is no need to rebase your armies. I for one will be keeping my models on the same basis as they were meant to be on in 8th edition Warhammer Fantasy Battles. And then I will just 3D print movement trays that represent the larger base sizes. And there's already STL files out there for just that. But what if you don't have a 3D printer? Well, I can almost guarantee that these kind of trays will be available at eBay or in Facebook groups for a very low cost. So I wouldn't really worry about availability. And the reason I'm doing this is not because I'm too lazy to rebase my armies, though I will admit that is part of it, but the biggest reason is that I still want to have the possibility to play 6th edition, 8th edition and Warhammer Armies project even after the old world has been released. But there is also another reason. I'm just like you, super excited for the old world. But what if the game is not as good as we hope it is? Truth be told, we haven't seen anything major about the rules so far, and what if I rebase all my armies to fit a game system that I don't like? That being said, I hope the game will be amazing, but it's good to hedge your bets. And now that we're touching on the rules, what will the rules for the old world be? Will it be 8th edition rules, 6th edition rules, or a completely new system? And here I will read a quote from Games Workshop. Warhammer the Old World will gather up all our favorite mechanics from the 3rd edition to the 8th edition, and add new elements where needed to create something deeply familiar yet fresh and new. And I think this is a great way to go about making the rule set. I also hope that they take some elements from Warhammer Armies project, as some of the stuff in WAP is just amazing and improves upon the rule set for 8th edition a great deal. I also hope that they go with the army sizes of 6th edition rather than 8th edition. I mean, lots of models on the table look really cool, but painting 150 models for a 2500 point army just isn't that fun. I mean, maybe the first 5 or 10 infantrymen of a 40-man unit is fun to paint, but the last 30, not so much. And finally, we get to the question everyone is wondering about. When is the old world going to be released? And well, we don't know yet. But considering the increased rate of releases of news regarding the old world, it seems relatively close. And for this next section here, you're gonna have to put your tinfoil hats on. Don't put any weight into what I say here. This is pure speculation. But if you look at the picture they've released regarding the release date, it shows a month that begins on a Wednesday and ends on a Thursday. And the next month that does this is November of this year, which according to my conspiracy theory would put the release date on the 23rd of November of this year. Again, this is probably just a coincidence. Don't put any weight into this and take it with a massive grain of salt. It's just kind of fun speculating on the release date. Anyways, that was all for today. I would love to hear your thoughts and speculations about the old world in the comment section down below. And if you want more news about the old world in the future, or maybe you just want to get hyped up for release by watching Warhammer Fantasy battle reports, you should consider subscribing. Like the video if you enjoyed it, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye.